In this discussion, we'll talk about economic systems. So what are economic systems? Well, economic system is a broad institutional framework which helps us decide how we allocate resources in an economy. Now, we know that in an economy, resources are scarce, and therefore we need to devise a system to allocate resources. So an economic system is simply helping us decide how do we allocate our scarce resources. There are three main types of economic systems depending on how much government involvement is there in making decisions. When you look at these systems, they are free market economy where there is no government intervention, planned economy where there's a lot of government intervention, and then there is the mixed economy where the government intervention is there but only in some parts and not found in others. But before we talk about how these economic systems work, we would like to talk about the three economic questions. What are three economic questions? Well, these are the guiding framework or guiding questions which help us in allocate resources. First one is what to produce. Now, the idea is this, that economy can choose any mix of goods and services, but can it produce an unlimited amount of goods and services? And the answer is no. Because we cannot produce everything, we need to decide what to produce and in what quantities. In other words, we need to decide whether we want more of capital goods or more of consumer goods. And graphically, if we want to show this concept, that would mean where do we want to be on the PPC? Do we want to produce more of capital goods or consumer goods? So in terms of PPC, we are deciding whether we want to be at point A or at point B, and that will be basically decided by the government if it's a command economy, or through different mechanism which is called the market force of demand supply in a free market economy, something which we'll talk about later. The next question is how to produce. Now, we know that because resources are scarce, we need to be considering how to utilize them. We want to make sure that the way we use our land, labor, capital, enterprise, we need to make sure that we are using it as efficiently as possible. And if we are doing so, we know this, that we will always be on the PPC. So if I get the question's answer right, which is how to produce, and if we do that in terms of in an efficient manner where all the resources are fully and efficiently employed, then we will make sure that we will always be on the PPC and not under the PPC like at point C. Lastly, the question that we need to answer is for whom to produce. Now, because we cannot satisfy all the wants of the population as resources are scarce, we need to make decisions in terms of how much of each person's need to be satisfied. For example, we may, as an economy, decide we need to allocate resources equally for everyone in the economy. Like if I have a piece of cake, and let's say if I have 30 students in my class, I may decide to give everyone an equal share. So each and every individual might get a very small share, but they will at least get something from the cake, which is basically what we call an equal distribution of resources. On the other hand, an economy may decide that some people, because they being more efficient or they being more powerful or they being more useful for the economy, need to get more. So this is basically where we're looking at a moral aspect of decision making, where basically we're deciding who will get the good. The moral question here, or moral aspect here, is are we looking at basically distributing our wealth or resources in an equal manner, or are we looking at distribution of resources in terms of whoever is stronger or better or efficient than somebody else in the economy? So our economic systems, in short, are basically trying to answer these three questions of what to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce. Let's start with free market economy to see how it works. A free market economy or a market economy is an economy where basically households and firms are acting in their own interest, and they are the one who are also owning resources. So a market economy is basically deciding sort of allocation of resources through the market forces of demand and supply that we'll talk about in a little while. And through this allocation or through this market forces of demand supply, it is trying to answer the three economic questions of what, how, and for whom to produce. Let's look at some of the features of the free market economy. In a free market economy, we say the main individuals or the main actors are your consumers who are buying goods and services. we have the producers who are producing these goods and services. We then have the owners of factors of production like land, labor, capital, enterprise. And lastly, we also see a government which is playing a very limited role, and we'll talk about that role in a little while. The key motivation of these economic actors, as we call them, is self-interest, which is basically trying to maximize their interest. So for example, if you are looking at a consumer, he's maximizing his satisfaction or individual welfare. He wants to make sure that whatever good he buy, he gets the maximum possible satisfaction from it. Then comes the producer, whose goal is to maximize profits, because whatever allocation he does from his scarce resources, he wants to get the maximum in terms of profitability. While the owners of factors of production, like for example, if I am a worker, I would need to maximize my wages. If I am a landlord who's owning a land, I will maximize my rent. Somebody who owns the factor of production capital will basically maximize the rent, the interest on it, because we're looking at interest as the opportunity cost. And lastly, from an enterprise perspective, we're looking at profits to be the return for the owner of factors of production, which is an enterprise. The government has a limited role, but we'll soon see that it will try to maximize people's social welfare or social interests. The ownership in this free market economy is of private individuals. Nothing is owned by the government. Private individuals own these resources, and the government, we said, has a limited role, and that role is to make sure that they uphold any property rights. What are property rights? Well, property rights are rights which basically allow you to not lose your property to somebody else. For example, if I own a car, I have property rights over it. Somebody cannot come randomly and take it away from me, which means there is a legal system protecting everyone's property right. And we believe in a free market economy, government has this limited role to play. Now, there's also something called free enterprise in this economic system. Now, what is free enterprise? Free enterprise is basically the idea that the factors of production, the owners of factors of production, they have the right to buy and sell to whoever they want through the market forces of demand supply. So for example, if I own land, I can sell it to anyone without anyone's consideration. Similarly, if somebody is owning labor, that owner of the factor of production has complete freedom. Nobody, neither the government or anyone else, will force them to give their resources to somebody else in the market without their own will. So there is a free will or free enterprise of people who own factors of production. And then there is competition as well that is found in this. Because people have complete freedom, the idea goes this, that there will be more competition in this market, because the idea is this, that if I am a person who's owning labor, then I will want to work to whoever is who's giving me the maximum possible salary. So the motivation is self-interest, and with free enterprise there will be competition, because producer, for example, may want to sort of go to the person who's giving the maximum possible price. Workers will basically give their services to the maximum possible wage, and so on. So the competition that exists in this market happens because of free sort of enterprise and self-interest. The decision making also is seen to be what we call decentralized in this economic system, which means that the government is not making any decisions. It's the private individuals who are deciding to make decisions about how the scarce resources will be allocated. And lastly, the allocation of these resources happens through the demand and supply, or the market forces demand supply. And we'll talk about demand supply later in a chapter where we see how it works. But the idea goes this: if the demand is high for any good, we will see the price to be high for that good, and a lot of people will be giving resources whenever the price goes up, because that's the good that is in high demand. Let's now look at how the three economic questions are answered in a free market economy. Well, the first question was what to produce. In a free market economy, we believe consumers determine the allocation of resources. We call consumers to be sovereign, and sovereign means simply independent. They are the one who are deciding how resources will be allocated. How do they do that? Well, the consumers basically have money, and they are spending money on these goods and services, which means that each consumer is kind of like voting for a good and service. The consumers, when they allocate resources to a good and they want to buy more of that good, the demand is high, we say. When the demand is high, automatically those resources will be produced. In other words, firm will get a signal because higher demand lead to higher price, something which we'll talk about later. That price mean that consumers will be finding that production of the good to be very profitable, and therefore more resources will be allocated for the production of that good. So put simply, the consumers are deciding what to produce in a free market economy, and they do this through their spending for goods and services. The next question is how to produce. Well, the idea goes this, that we know this producers are in competition with each other in this economic system. Why? Because when the consumers are deciding what to produce, producers are meeting this demand. And all other things being equal, consumers will buy goods from those who offer the lowest price. I mean, all other things or ceteris paribus being equal means that we're not considering quality right now. So producers must have to produce at the lowest cost if they are to survive in the market, because otherwise the price will be too high. And therefore this is determining how goods and services are produced, where a firm that has the lowest possible price, which means that is the firm which is as efficient as possible and has adopted the lowest cost technique of production, will be the one that will be allocating resources in an efficient manner. So the question's answer of how to produce will mean that the producer will be as efficient as possible so that they can offer the lowest possible price to the consumers. Lastly, we talk about for whom to produce. Well, in this economic system, those with high income and wealth are able to buy large amount of goods and services, while those with low income and little wealth will buy only few goods and services. So what we see is this, that your wealth and income decides who will get the goods, and therefore the amount of money people have are basically deciding for whom to produce.